The day I walked into the restaurant for my son's wedding, his bride rolled her eyes and muttered, "Oh, great, that old woman is here." But then her mother's eyes widened in disbelief, and she whispered, "Is that really her?" Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. In that instant, as the waitstaff melted into the shadows and a stunned silence fell over the guests, everyone finally grasped who I truly was. And that day became more than just my son's wedding day. It became the day justice was finally served. Interesting little place. A bit old-fashioned though, isn't it? Lillian Harrington remarked, standing in my doorway. She scanned the polished hardwood floors and the vintage floral wallpaper with the detached air of someone scrutinizing a museum artifact. Her expensive casual wear, a crisp linen blouse and tailored trousers that likely cost more than my entire monthly grocery budget, seemed to broadcast her discomfort with being in my modest home. "We like it here," I managed, forcing a smile as I stepped back to let her inside. Benjamin grew up in this house. My son emerged from the kitchen, looking handsome in a blue polo shirt, his hand nervously fiddling with the new engagement ring on his finger. "Lillian, you found it okay?" He leaned in to kiss her cheek, and I couldn't help but notice she barely returned the gesture. "Eventually. The GPS has trouble in this part of town." She glanced around again, her gaze sweeping over the gallery of family photos, lining the hallway pictures of Benjamin's first steps, school graduations, family vacations, and the worn but well-loved furniture my late husband and I had painstakingly collected over decades. People of your generation don't usually understand current trends in home design. The words, delivered with such casual dismissiveness, landed like a slap I almost didn't see coming. Benjamin's face flushed a delicate pink. "Mom's been cooking all morning. Come on. Let's eat." I had spent hours preparing his favorite meal. Slow roasted lamb with rosemary and garlic, honey glazed root vegetables, and a loaf of fresh, crusty bread. The dining room table was set with my finest china, the silverware gleaming and cloth napkins folded into perfect swans. Lillian settled into her chair as if she were doing us an immense favor, her attention immediately captured by the screen of her phone. "So, Lillian," I began, serving the plates with a steady hand. "Benjamin tells me you work in finance, investment consulting, high-end portfolio management." She cut a minuscule piece of lamb with surgical precision, took a small, evaluative bite, and then set her fork down with an air of finality. "It's complex stuff. It requires an understanding of market dynamics that, well, most people your age wouldn't really grasp." Benjamin jumped in quickly. "Mom's very financially savvy, actually. She's always given me great advice about—" "I'm sure she has." Lillian's smile was as thin as a razor's edge. "Different generations, different approaches. Nothing wrong with keeping things simple." Simple. The word hung in the air, as if my entire life's work could be equated to a child's lemonade stand. I watched her push the food around her plate, taking tiny, reluctant bites as though she feared contamination. The woman my son adored couldn't even feign enjoyment of a meal I had poured my heart and soul into creating for them. "This house has such character," Benjamin said, a note of desperation in his voice, as he tried to steer the conversation towards safer territory. "The original crown molding, the bay windows." Lillian glanced at her watch. "It could use an update, though. These old places, you know. Outdated electrical. Probably asbestos in the walls. When we're married, we'll definitely want something more modern. Contemporary design, smart home features. When we're married. Not if, but when." It was a declaration, as if my son's future was a settled business deal, and his childhood home was a property already marked for demolition. I refilled her water glass, though she hadn't asked. "Have you two thought about the wedding yet? Any ideas about venues?" Benjamin's eyes lit up. "Oh yes, We've been looking at the finest establishments in the city," Lillian interrupted, her voice sharp. "Money's no object, of course. We want something that properly reflects our status. Our status." I noted she said "our," but her gaze was fixed only on me when she said it, as if she were marking her territory in some imagined power struggle. The fog outside my windows was beginning to thicken. A typical late afternoon in our San Francisco neighborhood. Inside, the temperature seemed to be dropping as well. I served dessert, a homemade apple pie with a flaky, buttery crust, and watched as Lillian took a single polite bite before abandoning it completely. "Well," she announced, checking her phone again, "I suppose we should discuss the practical details. Wedding planning, guest lists, that sort of thing." Her tone was more suited to a corporate merger than a celebration of love. I looked at my son, who was still trying so hard to keep the conversation afloat, to make this impossibly difficult afternoon work. His happiness was more important than my bruised pride, but a cold, heavy feeling was settling in my chest, and a certain calculation was beginning to take shape in my mind. This woman saw us as obstacles to be managed, outdated fixtures in need of replacement. She'd made that abundantly clear. What she didn't realize was that some old things have very sharp edges when handled carelessly. The conversation had shifted to wedding venues, with Benjamin mentioning a few places he'd seen online. Perfect timing for my next move. "I know a wonderful restaurant for weddings," I said, clearing the last of the dinner plates. "Reasonable prices, but the quality is excellent. The chef there does amazing work." Lillian's fork clattered against her dessert plate. "We're not beggars." Her voice had jumped 2 octaves. Benjamin nearly spilled his coffee. "Lillian, calm down. Mom was just trying to help." "Help?" She stood up so abruptly that her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "Your mother thinks we need help finding a reasonable venue? Do you have any idea what kind of insult that is?" I kept my voice level, feigning curiosity. "I apologize. I didn't realize your family was in the restaurant business. Not just any restaurant business." Her chest puffed out like a bantam rooster. "Harrington's on the Park. 5-star dining. We've hosted governors, tech moguls, international dignitaries. The wedding industry calls us when they want true luxury." "That sounds impressive," I said, genuinely interested now. "Whereabouts is it located?" "Downtown. Right off Union Square." Pride radiated from every word she spoke. My mother built that empire from nothing. Started with one small bistro 30 years ago. Now we're the premier fine dining destination in Northern California. Benjamin was shooting warning looks between us, but I gently pressed forward. "Your mother must be quite the businesswoman. How many employees does a place like that require?" 47 full-time staff. Our executive chef was poached from a Michelin-starred restaurant in New York. Our sommelier trained in France. Our host staff speaks multiple languages. Each detail was delivered like a bullet point in a presentation. The kitchen alone cost more to build than most people make in 5 years. "And you're involved in the day-to-day operations?" "I handle the business side. Financial planning, investment strategies, vendor negotiations." Her earlier condescension was now replaced by an aggressive, defensive pride. "Someone has to keep the books straight when you're running a multi-million-dollar operation." Multi-million-dollar, 47 employees, prime downtown real estate. The numbers were adding up in my head, painting a picture that I found very interesting indeed. "That's fascinating," I said. "I imagine the overhead must be enormous. Rent in that area alone." Lillian laughed, but there was a sharp edge to it. "Rent? We own the building. Bought it outright in 2019. No bank loans, no investors. Pure family money. Pure family money." I filed that detail away carefully. Benjamin had gone quiet, watching this exchange with a growing sense of unease. He could sense the undercurrents, the way two people can size each other up. But he couldn't possibly know what I was truly measuring. "Well," I said finally, "it sounds like Benjamin will have quite the celebration. I'm sure your mother's restaurant will provide exactly the kind of wedding he deserves." "Exactly." Lillian straightened her blouse, satisfied that she had established the proper hierarchy. "The Harrington name means something in this city. Quality, tradition, excellence, things that matter. Things that matter. Unlike reasonable prices, apparently. Unlike this old-fashioned house, where her future husband grew up happy and loved." I could see she was finished with us now, ready to escape back to her world of contemporary design and proper breeding. The meal was clearly over in her mind, even though my homemade pie sat nearly untouched on her plate. "Speaking of the restaurant," I said casually, "what kind of cuisine does your mother specialize in?" "New American with French influences. Prix-fixe menus start at $120 per person. Wine pairings are extra. We're booked solid through December." She checked her watch again, more obviously this time. "Actually, I should probably head out soon. I have an early morning tomorrow." The fog outside had thickened into a proper San Francisco gloom, and I could tell Lillian was already mentally out the door. But she had given me exactly what I needed. Pride-fueled details about the family business, specific location information, and financial bragging disguised as conversation. 47 employees depending on Harrington's on the park for their livelihoods. A multi-million-dollar operation with prime real estate owned outright. All very impressive, and all very vulnerable if something were to go wrong. "Of course," I said. "Thank you so much for coming. This has been very educational. Well, I really should get going." Lillian stood abruptly, already reaching for her jacket. The evening fog had settled thick against the window panes, and she seemed eager to escape before it enveloped the neighborhood entirely. The goodbye was awkward. A brief, formal handshake for me. A distracted kiss on Benjamin's cheek. "I'll call you tomorrow about the venue details," she told him, already moving toward the door. "We need to lock in the dates soon." I watched from the porch as she climbed into her sleek black Tesla and pulled away with unnecessary acceleration. The taillights vanished into the dense fog within seconds, leaving behind only the faint, sterile silence of an electric motor. Benjamin stood beside me, his arms wrapped around himself against the evening chill. "I'm sorry about Lillian," he said quietly. "She's just very protective of the family business. Sometimes she gets defensive when—" he winced. "When people suggest reasonable alternatives." "Benjamin, please, she didn't mean anything by it. Her mother's worked so hard to build that restaurant. They're proud of what they've accomplished." "I understand pride," I said, guiding him back inside where the warmth of the house waited. "But pride and arrogance are not the same thing." We settled in the living room, where the soft lamplight was more forgiving. Benjamin curled into the corner of the sofa, the same spot he'd always claimed as a child, when we were about to have one of our serious talks. "She made you feel small," he said finally, his voice thick with embarrassment. I could see it. The way she talked about the house, about your suggestions. I tried to redirect the conversation, but she just kept going. "Benjamin." I sat in the armchair across from him, leaning forward. "I need you to do something for me. And I need you to not ask any questions about it right now." His eyebrows lifted in surprise. "What kind of something?" "Don't tell her about my work. What I do for a living, where I work, any of it. Just keep that information private for now." "Mom, she already thinks you're just some retiree puttering around the house. Why would I need to?" "Just trust me on this one. Can you do that for me?" He studied my face, searching for clues I wasn't ready to provide. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Of course. But you're being mysterious. And I don't like mysteries. Sometimes mysteries have good reasons behind them." A car door slammed outside, Lillian's Tesla had returned. Benjamin jumped up to look out the window. She's back. She probably forgot something. But instead of her coming to the door, I heard the quiet hum of the engine. Again. Through the fog, I caught a glimpse of Benjamin running toward the street, his blue shirt a bright spot against the gray evening. He had left his jacket inside. I watched from the window as he climbed into the passenger seat. There was a brief conversation, a series of gestures I couldn't decipher. Then they were gone again, this time for good. The house felt different with them gone. Larger, quieter, but also imbued with a new sense of purpose. I cleaned the dinner dishes methodically, my mind replaying the details. Harrington's on the Park, Union Square. 47 employees. A multi-million-dollar operation. Full family ownership. Lillian Harrington thought she knew exactly what kind of woman I was. Some simple retiree who didn't understand modern business. Who lived in an old-fashioned house and made naive suggestions about reasonable restaurant prices. A woman whose son had risen above his modest beginnings to catch himself a prize. She had no idea that some old things are far more dangerous than they appear. I dried the last plate and headed upstairs to my office. It was time to do a little research on the Harrington family business. Just out of curiosity, of course. Just to better understand the empire my future daughter-in-law was so fiercely proud of. My computer hummed to life in the darkness, the screen's glow reflecting off the window where the fog pressed against the glass like curious, ghostly fingers. My office felt like a sanctuary after the afternoon's tense performance. 2 large computer monitors hummed to life as I settled into the worn leather chair that had witnessed countless late-night research sessions. Outside, the fog was solidifying into a deep evening gloom. But inside, the fluorescent light cast everything in sharp, uncompromising focus. I typed, "Harrington's on the Park, San Francisco," into the search bar, and watched the results populate. Their official website appeared first, a slick and polished presentation. There were glossy photos of perfectly plated dishes, elegant shots of the dining room, and glowing testimonials praising the exceptional cuisine and impeccable service. It was the kind of high-end marketing that costs a serious amount of money. The location was confirmed, a prestigious address near Union Square, just as Lillian had boasted. The hours were listed as Tuesday through Saturday, 5:30 to 10:30 p.m., closed Sundays and Mondays. The prix-fixe menu started at $120 per person. Exactly as she'd said. But websites are designed to lie. Reviews often tell a different story. I clicked through to Yelp, Google Reviews, and OpenTable ratings. A disturbing pattern emerged quickly. Far too quickly for comfort. The reviews were mixed, leaning heavily negative over the past 6 months. There were consistent complaints about slow service, overpriced and mediocre food, and a staff that acted as if they were doing the customers a favor by simply being there. Waited 45 minutes for our appetizers, one recent review read. My steak was overcooked and cold. When I mentioned it to the waiter, he just rolled his eyes and said the kitchen was backed up. Never again. Another one stated, beautiful space, terrible execution. Our server disappeared for 20-minute stretches. The food was lukewarm when it finally arrived. For these prices, it's completely unacceptable. I pulled out a yellow legal pad, an old habit from decades of taking notes, and started writing. Service complaints consistent across multiple platforms. Food quality declining over the past year. Staff attitude, universally described as condescending or indifferent. Maybe these were just disgruntled competitors writing fake reviews. Or perhaps they were from customers with unrealistic expectations. But the patterns were too specific, the details too vivid. Real customers mentioned specific dishes, particular servers, and exact dates. This wasn't a coordinated attack. This was a business in a state of decline. My pen tapped against the desk as I dug deeper. I pulled up the health department inspection reports from the city's public records website. There were 2 violations in the past 8 months. One for improper food storage temperatures, and another for inadequate hand-washing stations. They were minor infractions, but they were telling. Good restaurants, truly great ones, do not accumulate violations. Lillian had painted a picture of culinary excellence, a 5-star establishment where governors and tech moguls chose to dine for important occasions. But the evidence in front of me suggested something entirely different. It pointed to a restaurant trading on a past reputation while its current operations were crumbling from the inside out. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. This was no longer just about my son's wedding venue. This was about his future with a woman whose family business might be built on a foundation of quicksand. The clock on my computer screen read 5:30 p.m. It was dinner time for most people, but Harrington's on the Park wouldn't open again until Tuesday. That gave me 2 days. 2 days to decide whether to investigate further or to trust that the negative reviews were just outliers and that Lillian's confidence was justified. 2 days to choose between being a protective mother and being an interfering old woman. I closed my laptop with a soft click. But the restaurant's address was already committed to memory. Perhaps it was time to see for myself whether the Harrington empire was as solid as Lillian so proudly claimed. Monday dragged by like a guilty conscience. I had spent the entire weekend replaying Saturday's lunch, analyzing every condescending comment, every dismissive gesture. By Monday evening, my initial curiosity had hardened into a firm determination. The downtown fog hung thick and heavy as I walked the 3 blocks from the Powell Street BART station to the restaurant. Harrington's on the Park occupied the ground floor of a beautifully renovated 19th-century building. Its facade promised old-world elegance, with polished brass fixtures, delicately etched glass windows, and a deep burgundy awning with gold lettering. First impressions mattered immensely in the restaurant business, and theirs certainly made the right statement. A hostess in a severe black dress and a forced tight smile greeted me. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation? I was hoping you might have something available, just for one." Her eyes swept over my casual blazer and dark trousers. Acceptable, but clearly not impressive. "We're quite busy tonight, but I think we can accommodate you." The tone suggested she was bestowing a great favor upon me. "Right this way, please." She led me to a small, isolated table, right near the swinging kitchen doors. The kind of undesirable spot, typically reserved for walk-ins and customers, the staff deemed unimportant. That was fine by me. It offered a better view of the operations anyway. The dining room tried hard to evoke an atmosphere of sophistication with its dark wood paneling, crisp white tablecloths, and subdued lighting from crystal fixtures. But my trained eye immediately caught the details others might miss. The faint water spots on the glassware, the slight tears in the upholstery of the chairs, the carpet worn thin in the high-traffic areas. It was the kind of accumulated wear and tear that signaled deferred maintenance, of corners being cut where they hoped customers wouldn't immediately notice. A waiter approached, menu in hand. He was a young man, probably college-aged, with that particular brand of arrogance that comes from working somewhere that considers itself exclusive. "Can I start you with something to drink?" he asked, though his attention was already drifting to more promising, larger tables. "Just water for now. I'd like a few minutes with the menu." He nodded with a distinct lack of enthusiasm and disappeared. I studied the offerings. It was new American cuisine with French influences, exactly as Lillian had described. A filet mignon for $58. Lobster risotto for $42. Duck confit for $39. These were premium prices that demanded premium execution. Around me, the restaurant hummed with a kind of forced, chaotic energy that comes from a staff trying too hard to appear competent. The servers moved with a studied efficiency, but I noticed their timing was completely off. Some tables were receiving appetizers while others nearby were still waiting for their drink orders. Entrees were arriving before appetizer plates had been cleared. The basic rhythm of service was utterly disrupted. The couple at the table next to mine was discussing their delayed meal in increasingly frustrated whispers. 20 minutes, just for bread service, the woman muttered. At these prices, this is ridiculous. When my waiter returned, I was ready. I'll have the filet mignon, medium rare, with the potato gratin. Of course, he said, but there was something in his tone, a barely concealed smirk, as if my straightforward order amused him somehow. That'll be right out, turned into 45 minutes. I watched as other tables received their food, while mine remained conspicuously empty. When the plate finally arrived, the steak was overcooked to a dismal gray and was barely lukewarm. The potato gratin had congealed into a single, unappetizing mass. "How is everything?" the waiter asked perfunctorily, already moving away before I could even formulate an answer. "Actually," I called him back, "this steak is well done, not medium rare." He glanced at the plate with a look of theatrical concern. "Oh well, the kitchen's really backed up right now. I could ask them to fix it, but it'll probably be another 30 minutes. Another 30 minutes. In a restaurant that charged premium prices and claimed to offer exceptional service. I thought about the health department violations, the string of negative online reviews, the declining standards hidden behind a veneer of marketing polish. "That's fine," I said. "I'll eat it as island." The relief on his face was almost comical. Clearly, this was their strategy. Make customers who complained wait long enough that they eventually gave up. It was an efficient way to avoid kitchen costs while maintaining the illusion of fine dining. I ate slowly, observing everything. Staff members huddled in corners, complaining about customers and management. From the kitchen, I could hear the clang of dropped pans and the sound of raised voices. It was the unmistakable atmosphere of a workplace where standards had slipped, and no one particularly cared enough to fix them. By the time I signaled for the check, I had learned everything I needed to know about Harrington's on the Park. This wasn't a five-star establishment hosting governors and tech executives. This was a failing restaurant, coasting on its past reputation while delivering substandard service to customers who were either too polite or too intimidated to complain effectively. My son wanted to hold his wedding reception here. The thought made my stomach clench tighter than the overcooked steak had. The check sat on my table like an accusation. 87 for a mediocre meal and indifferent service. I was reaching for my wallet when I heard a door slam somewhere behind me, followed by the sound of sharp, angry footsteps on the hardwood floor. "What is she doing here?" The voice, sharp and furious, carried across the dining room with unmistakable authority. I turned to see Lillian emerging from what appeared to be a back office. Her face flushed a deep, angry red as she spotted me at my corner table. The other diners began to notice the commotion, their conversations dropping to hushed whispers. She strode across the restaurant like a woman marching into battle, weaving between tables with a barely controlled fury. The same staff I'd been watching all evening suddenly found urgent tasks that required their immediate attention, their heads down as they avoided eye contact with their boss. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, arriving at my table with enough force to make the water glasses tremble. "Did you come here to spy on my restaurant?" I set down my napkin carefully, maintaining the same calm demeanor I'd practiced through decades of difficult situations. "I just wanted to have dinner, Lillian. Your restaurant has quite a reputation." "That's complete nonsense." Her voice rose another octave, drawing stares from every occupied table in the room. "You're here to cause trouble, to undermine our business somehow." The accusation was so paranoid, so detached from reality, that I almost laughed. "Lillian, I ordered a meal, and I ate it. There's nothing sinister about, get out." The words came out like a slap. Get out of here immediately." The dining room had gone completely silent now. Servers stood frozen with plates in their hands, watching their boss have a complete public meltdown. The hostess looked mortified. The couple next to me was openly staring, probably wondering if they should call for help. "Lillian," I said quietly, "you're making a scene. Perhaps we should—" I said, "Get out!" She was practically shouting now, her face purple with rage. "You have no business being here. This is harassment." Harassment. For eating dinner at a public restaurant. I wondered what her mother would think of this performance. What the other customers were thinking as they watched the supposed financial director of Harrington's on the Park lose control so completely. I stood up slowly, pulling cash from my wallet and placing it on the table, the exact amount, plus a standard tip. Despite the terrible service, professional habits die hard, and I wasn't about to give her any ammunition by skipping out on the bill. "I'll leave," I said, my voice loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Thank you for the educational evening." The walk to the front door felt endless. Every eye in the restaurant followed my progress. Some sympathetic, others simply curious about the drama unfolding before them. Behind me, I could hear Lillian still ranting to no one in particular about spies and harassment, and the need for respect for family businesses. The cool evening air hit my face like a salvation. I walked slowly down the street, processing what had just happened. Lillian's paranoid overreaction, her complete loss of professional composure, the way her own staff had cowered rather than supported her. All of it painted a picture I was finally beginning to understand. This wasn't just a restaurant with service problems. This was a business being run by someone fundamentally unstable, someone who saw enemies in paying customers and threats in reasonable questions. And my son wanted to build his life with this woman. The fog swirled around the street lamps as I headed toward the BART station, but my mind was crystal clear. I had come here looking for information about a wedding venue. Instead, I had discovered something much more troubling. A future daughter-in-law whose judgment and temperament were far worse than I had ever imagined. The fog swirled thick around the downtown street lamps as I walked away from Harrington's on the Park, my footsteps echoing on the damp pavement. Other pedestrians hurried past with their heads down, everyone eager to escape the damp chill that was settling over San Francisco. Behind me, I could still see the restaurant's warm, inviting glow, and I could imagine the whispered conversations inside about the woman who had been publicly ejected for the crime of eating dinner. Professional humiliation wasn't new to me, but this felt different. It felt personal and raw in a way that caught me completely off guard. I turned the corner, letting muscle memory guide me toward the Powell Street BART station. My route took me past 3 other restaurants, a cozy Italian place with red and white checkered tablecloths, a trendy gastropub with craft beer signs glowing in the window, and a hole-in-the-wall Chinese joint that had probably been serving the same beloved family recipes for decades. Each one was buzzing with the sounds of satisfied customers and efficient service, the kind of genuine, welcoming atmosphere that made people want to return. They were everything Harrington's on the Park pretended to be but wasn't. The steady rhythm of my footsteps on the sidewalk helped to clear my head, replacing the chaos of Lillian's shouting. By the time I reached Market Street, the initial shock was giving way to cold, hard analysis. What I had witnessed tonight wasn't just poor service or a single bad evening. This was a systemic failure. An understaffed kitchen, undertrained servers, and management that responded to problems with aggression instead of solutions. A chilling question formed in my mind. If she treats her future mother-in-law this way, what will happen to Benjamin after the wedding? The question followed me down into the BART station, through the turnstiles, and onto the train that would carry me back toward my quiet neighborhood. I had seen this pattern before in my professional life. Businesses that looked successful and polished from the outside, while they were rotting from within. It was always the same story, pride masking incompetence, arrogance hiding a deep-seated desperation. Lillian's explosion tonight hadn't been about protecting her restaurant's reputation. It had been about protecting her lies. The train swayed gently as we crossed under the bay, and I found myself thinking about my late husband, David. He would have had some strong opinions about tonight's events. He had always been better at reading people than I was, quicker to spot the subtle warning signs that someone wasn't what they seemed. "Trust your instincts, Sarah," he used to say. "Your brain knows things your heart doesn't want to accept yet." My instincts were screaming now. Lillian Harrington wasn't just rude or entitled, she was dangerous. Not in a physical sense, perhaps, but in the insidious way that weak people with power often become dangerous through manipulation, through control, through the gradual erosion of the confidence and spirit of everyone around them. And my son, my dear Benjamin, was planning to marry her in 6 weeks. The train pulled into my station, and I climbed the stairs back to street level. The fog was even thicker here in the residential neighborhoods, muffling all sound and turning the streetlights into soft, ethereal halos. I walked the familiar blocks toward home, past houses where families were settling in for the evening, past lives that seemed so much simpler and safer than the one my son was actively choosing for himself. By the time I reached my own front door, my professional mind was fully engaged. I had information now concrete. First-hand evidence of poor business practices, unstable management, and a woman whose public behavior suggested serious character flaws. The only question was what to do with that information. Inside, the house felt too quiet, too empty. I hung my coat in the hallway closet and was just reaching for the light switch when my phone began to ring. "How could you do that, Mom?" Lillian told me everything. Benjamin's voice, raw with fury, hit me like a physical blow. There was no greeting, no gentle questioning, just an immediate attack from someone who had already made up his mind about who was guilty and who was innocent. "Benjamin, it's not what you think. She said you came to the restaurant and caused a scene, that you embarrassed her in front of her customers and her staff." His voice broke slightly, the anger momentarily giving way to pain. "How could you humiliate her like that?" I sank into the living room armchair, still holding my coat. "I went there for dinner, Benjamin. That's all. I just wanted to see the place. You went there to spy on her, to find fault with her family's business." Each accusation landed with increasing intensity. "She trusted you enough to tell you about the restaurant, and you used that information against her." The manipulation was breathtaking in its completeness. Lillian had gotten to him first, twisted the narrative, and cast herself as the victim before I had even walked through my own front door. My calm, rational son, the young man who usually thought through problems so carefully, had been transformed into an emotional weapon aimed directly at his own mother. "Benjamin, please listen to me. I simply ordered a meal." "Stop lying!" The words came out as a sob. "Lillian said you harassed the staff, complained about everything, and tried to make trouble for her mother's business. And when she politely asked you to leave, you made a scene." Politely asked. The phrase was so far from reality. It was almost comical. Except that nothing about this conversation was funny. "That's not what happened," I said, keeping my voice level despite the growing knot of dread in my stomach. "I was a paying customer. I ordered dinner, I ate it, and I was preparing to leave when she spotted me." She became aggressive. She was protecting her family's reputation from someone who came there with malicious intent. Malicious intent. He was using her exact words now, parroting her version of events with complete and unwavering conviction. The speed of his transformation was stunning. This was the same son who had apologized for her behavior just days ago, who had promised to keep my profession a secret, who had seemed so uncomfortable with her arrogance. "Sweetheart, I understand you want to defend her, but don't call me sweetheart." The fury in his voice was unlike anything I had ever heard from him. You've shown your true feelings about Lillian. You don't want me to be happy. You can't stand that I found someone successful and accomplished. That's not true. I want nothing more than your happiness. Then why did you go to her restaurant to cause trouble? Why couldn't you just stay out of our lives? Stay out of our lives. The phrase cut deeper than any of the accusations. This was my son, the little boy I had raised alone after his father died, the young man I had supported through college and career struggles and relationship heartbreaks. And now he was telling me to stay out of his life, because a woman he had known for 8 months had convinced him that I was the enemy. Benjamin? I tried one more time. Please just consider that there might be another side to this story. That, maybe, there is no other side. His voice was final, absolute. I believe the woman I'm going to marry. I believe someone who loves me. And if you can't respect that, if you can't respect her, then maybe you shouldn't be a part of our wedding. The threat hung in the air like toxic smoke. I sat in my dark living room, still wearing my coat, listening to my son's harsh, ragged breathing through the phone. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like curious ghosts. I see, I said quietly. Do you? Do you really? Because I'm done with this conversation. I'm done with your suspicions and your interference. Lillian was right. Some people just can't be happy for others' success. The line went dead. I sat there holding the phone long after the dial tone had faded, staring at the dark screen as if it might suddenly ring again with an apology, an explanation, anything that would restore the son I thought I knew. But the silence stretched on, broken only by the distant, muffled sounds of the city settling into the night. Lillian hadn't just ejected me from her restaurant. She had ejected me from my son's life. The weeks that followed moved like a slow-motion disaster. I called Benjamin's number 17 times over the next month. Each attempt was met with the impersonal greeting of his voicemail. Each message I left was increasingly desperate. My texts showed as delivered, but were never marked as read, electronic messages disappearing into the void of his anger. Benjamin, please call me back. We need to talk about what really happened. Sweetheart, I'm worried about you. This silence isn't like you. I love you. Nothing else matters. But silence was exactly like him when he felt he'd made up his mind. Even as a child, Benjamin could shut out the entire world when he felt betrayed. The very same trait that had once protected him from playground bullies was now being used to protect him from his own mother. My house felt hollow without his weekly visits, without the sound of his laughter echoing from the kitchen as he helped me cook Sunday dinners. I found myself setting 2 places at the table out of sheer habit, only to stare at the empty chair where he used to sit and complain about work, ask for advice about women who weren't worth his time, and plan the future that had seemed so bright just a few weeks ago. The future that now included Lillian Harrington as a permanent and destructive fixture. I threw myself into my work, staying late at the office, accepting assignments I would normally delegate anything to avoid coming home to the crushing silence. My colleagues noticed the change in me, but attributed it to normal stress. None of them knew about the son who no longer answered my calls, or the future daughter-in-law who had so successfully poisoned the most important relationship in my life. 3 weeks into the silence, I almost drove to his apartment. I sat in my car outside his building for 20 minutes, just watching the windows of his flat for any sign of life. But what would I say? How do you convince someone they've been manipulated when the manipulator has already made you the villain of their story? I drove home without ever knocking on his door. May arrived with its typical San Francisco unpredictability, sunny mornings giving way to foggy afternoons, the city unable to decide what season it wanted to embrace. I was sorting through a pile of mail on a Tuesday evening when I saw it. A thick, cream-colored envelope, the address written in elegant calligraphy. It was the kind of formal invitation that announces only the most important of occasions. Miss Diaz. Sarah Myers is cordially invited to the wedding of Mr. Benjamin David Myers and Miss Lillian James Harrington. Saturday, May 17th, 2025. Reception to follow at Harrington's on the Park. Tomorrow. I stared at the invitation, turning it over and over in my hands, as if it might contain a hidden message. After weeks of complete silence, he had still invited me. It was either a gesture born of obligation, a flicker of hope, or more likely because Lillian had insisted on it, wanting to show his mother exactly how little her opinions mattered by making her watch as he married the very woman I had tried to warn him against. The reception was to be held at Harrington's on the Park. Of course, it would be. The same restaurant where I had been publicly humiliated, where Lillian had revealed her true nature to a room full of witnesses. They wanted me to watch my son celebrate his future in the exact location where his fiancée had shown me who she really was. I set the invitation on my kitchen table and stared at it while I made a pot of coffee. I had 24 hours to decide whether to attend the wedding of the son who no longer spoke to me. To watch him bind his life to a woman I knew would make him miserable. 24 hours to figure out how to save my son from the biggest mistake of his life. The coffee grew cold in my cup as I sat there planning. My professional mind was fully engaged now, calculating risks and opportunities, considering all the ways this could go terribly wrong. But beneath all the strategic thinking was something much simpler and more powerful. A mother's love that refused to give up, even when giving up seemed like the only rational choice. Tomorrow, Benjamin would marry Lillian Harrington, and tomorrow, I would be there to watch it happen. Saturday morning arrived gray and cool, with typical San Francisco weather that couldn't quite decide between seasons. I woke before dawn, the wedding invitation still visible on my nightstand, the cream-colored paper catching the first faint light of day, like a silent accusation. Today would change everything, one way or another. The shower water ran hotter than usual, the steam fogging the bathroom mirror as I let the heat work the tension from my shoulders. Methodical preparation had always calmed my nerves before difficult assignments, and this morning would be no different. I shaved my legs with precision, combed my hair, until not a single strand was out of place. In my walk-in closet, I surveyed my formal options with the same critical attention I'd once given to restaurant reviews. A navy suit, a charcoal gray dress, a classic black pantsuit. Each sent a different message. Today called for authority wrapped in a cloak of respectability. I chose the charcoal wool suit with subtle pinstripes, tailored perfectly to project competence without a hint of ostentation. The tie selection took longer. I finally settled on a simple silk scarf in a rich burgundy conservative, but elegant. Sterling silver earrings, a gift from my late husband for our 20th anniversary. Italian leather shoes, polished to a mirror brightness. Every single detail mattered when you needed to establish credibility with people who judge appearances first. Standing before the full-length mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Months of takeout meals and sleepless nights had sharpened my features, adding a new gravity to an expression that used to be softer. It was my professional armor, complete and impenetrable. The wedding gift sat wrapped on my dresser, a beautiful crystal vase from Tiffany's, elegant and entirely appropriate. It was nothing that would reveal my true profession or my financial capabilities. Just a thoughtful present from a mother for her son's new life. The card tucked inside contained only 3 words: "Love you always." I checked my watch. 8:30 a.m. The ceremony began at 2 p.m., with the reception immediately following. That gave me enough time to drive downtown, find parking, and position myself strategically before the crucial moment arrived. Keys, wallet, the invitation tucked securely into my breast pocket. I took one final glance around the house that had felt so painfully empty for the past month, knowing that when I returned tonight, everything would be different. Either I would have my son back, or I would have lost him forever. But one way or another, Lillian Harrington would finally understand exactly who she had been dealing with. The front door closed behind me, with a decisive, final click. It was time to remind certain people that respect isn't negotiable, and that some old women bite much harder than they expect. Harrington's on the Park had been transformed into something approaching actual elegance. Drapes of white silk softened the worn edges I had noticed during my previous visit, while strategic uplighting created warm pools of light that cleverly disguised the water stains and threadbare carpet. It was wedding magic, hiding a flawed reality beneath a beautiful surface. How perfectly appropriate. I entered during the cocktail hour, scanning the room for familiar faces. Guests mingled in small clusters, their champagne glasses catching the light from the crystal fixtures. The staff moved with an unusual precision, clearly under strict orders to perform flawlessly for this very special occasion. "Mom." Benjamin's voice cut through the reception chatter like a lifeline. He appeared at my side, looking impossibly handsome in his tuxedo, radiant with a happiness that made my chest tighten, with a fierce, protective love. "I'm so glad you came," he whispered, embracing me tightly. After everything that happened, wild horses couldn't have kept me away," I replied, and I meant every word. "You look absolutely wonderful." Relief flooded his features. "I've missed you so much. This whole month has felt wrong without you." Around us, I noticed several of the restaurant employees stealing glances in our direction. Word was spreading quickly through the staff. The woman from that night was back. The one who had caused such a scene with the boss. A nervous energy rippled through their ranks like a stone dropped in still water. Across the room, near the bar where the wedding toasts would soon be offered, I spotted Lillian deep in conversation with an older woman who had to be her mother. Margaret Harrington possessed the same arrogant bearing as her daughter, but it was tempered with the weariness that comes from actually running a business. They were discussing something intently, occasionally gesturing toward different areas of the restaurant. "Oh no, that old woman showed up again." Lillian's voice carried further than she had intended, reaching several nearby guests who turned with curious expressions. Her mother followed her gaze, her eyes landing directly on me with a sharp, calculating expression. "Is that really her?" Margaret's response held a note I couldn't immediately interpret. Recognition, perhaps? Or a concern that went deeper than simple wedding guest management. The conversation between mother and daughter continued in lowered tones, but their body language spoke volumes. Margaret's pointed questions, Lillian's defensive response, the way both women kept glancing in my direction with a growing sense of unease. Whatever reputation preceded me, it was significant enough to cause them genuine worry. I stayed close to Benjamin, playing the role of the devoted mother, while observing everything with a professional detachment. Staff members whispered amongst themselves, some pointing discreetly in my direction. Guests began to notice the undercurrent of tension, their conversations growing quieter, as people sensed that a drama was brewing just beneath the wedding's polished surface. Margaret Harrington straightened her designer jacket and began walking purposefully in our direction. Her expression was carefully neutral, but her eyes were sharp with assessment. The moment I had been waiting for was finally approaching. Behind her, Lillian watched with visible anxiety, clearly dreading whatever conversation was about to unfold. It was time for introductions. "Good afternoon." Margaret Harrington extended her hand with practiced hospitality, but I caught the careful way she studied my face. "I'm Margaret Harrington, mother of the bride, and owner of this establishment. I don't believe we've been properly introduced." "Sarah Myers," I replied, accepting her handshake with firm confidence. "Mother of the groom." "Ah, yes, of course. How do you find my restaurant?" "I do hope everything meets your expectations." The question hung in the air between us, loaded with far more weight than simple politeness. Around us, nearby guests had begun to listen in, sensing the significance in this seemingly casual exchange. "Don't worry," I said with careful precision, my voice carrying just far enough to reach a few interested ears. "Today, I'm just a guest, not a restaurant critic." The effect was immediate and electric. Margaret's handshake faltered, her eyes widening with sudden, dawning recognition. Several guests who had been half listening snapped to full attention. The words, "restaurant critic," rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Staff members froze mid-service, understanding at once that their previous treatment of this particular guest had been catastrophically inappropriate. Margaret began, then stopped herself, her diplomatic training warring with her obvious dismay. "Sarah Myers, San Francisco Chronicle," I confirmed calmly. "Though, as I said, today, I'm simply here to celebrate my son's wedding." Benjamin stared at me, his face a mask of shock and dawning understanding. "Mom, you're a restaurant critic? That's your job?" Before I could answer, Lillian appeared at my elbow, her face pale and desperate. The arrogant woman who had publicly humiliated me 6 weeks ago had been replaced by someone who understood exactly how much trouble she was in. "Please," she said quietly, her voice thick with a barely controlled panic. "Please, forgive me. I had no idea who you were. I never would have, the way I treated you." "I see." I studied her face with the same clinical attention I had once reserved for overcooked steaks and pretentious wine lists. "Forgiveness takes time, Lillian, especially since, because of your behavior, my son didn't speak to me for a month." The wedding reception continued around us, but our small circle had become the undeniable center of attention. Margaret was working frantically to manage the situation, offering diplomatic smiles and engaging in quiet damage control, while staff members exchanged horrified glances about their previous abysmal service. Lillian's hand shook slightly as she reached for her champagne glass. "Whatever I can do to make this right, anything at all." "What you can do," I said with measured calm, "is treat people with respect in the future, regardless of who they are or what you think they can do for you." Benjamin slipped his arm through mine, a final, complete understanding dawning in his eyes. "This is why you asked me not to tell her about your work. Sometimes it's useful to see how people behave when they think no one important is watching," I replied, watching Lillian's face cycle through shame, fear, and desperate calculation. The woman who had called me an interfering old fool, who had had me thrown out of her restaurant like a common troublemaker, now stood before me, begging for a forgiveness she had not earned. Justice, served not through revenge, but through the simple, powerful revelation of truth. Margaret cleared her throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should all discuss how to move forward from here." I looked at my son, so handsome in his tuxedo, but finally seeing his fiancée clearly for the very first time. The choice of what happened next would be his to make. But at least now, he would make it with all the information he needed. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.